Okay, this is going to be a video, day 2 of Simplify and Verify. I want to talk about these kinds of problems: cosine squared minus 1 over secant squared theta minus 1. Okay, so what we want to look for sometimes is we want to look for identities. Now, one thing we have to keep in mind: a minus is going to stay a minus. Okay, we talked about this concept of opposite switch, where if you took out a -1, you could flip these around. Now, the key is the minus stays a minus. So if the thing's a plus, flipping around is not going to change it. Okay, all right. So that's something to keep in mind. All right. Now, like for instance, this one, if I flipped it around with a -1, it turns into this, which is an identity. So that's what you sort of want to do, is figure out, should I flip that around? Now this one can just stay like it is because this is flat out tangent squared. All right. Now, little piece of advice: if you take out a -1, maybe put that down here to finish out your answer. Just leave it alone for right now. Okay, so this 1 minus cosine squared is sine squared. So I got sine squared theta over tangent squared theta, which that's sine squared theta divided by tangent squared theta, which that's sine squared divided by sine squared over cosine squared. Okay, what does division of fractions do? Flips the second. So I got sine squared times cosine squared over sine squared. All right, so I crossed that off, okay, and I'm left with cosine squared. Now remember, I took out that -1, so I just want to multiply that times -1. So my actual answer is negative cosine squared. That sometimes leaving that negative out to the end will help you, okay? All right. Now, let's go over another one. All right, so I got secant squared theta plus 1 over 1 minus secant squared theta. Now, when I look at this one, my identity, okay, if you go back to your identity chart that we've had, the identity is secant squared theta minus 1 is equal to tangent squared. Now, here's my point, okay? I can't change this one. This plus can't become a minus, so that's going to stay. This I can take out a -1 on. So that stays here. I have a -1, and now I can flip this around to be this. Once again, because I have that -1, I'm going to put that down here for my answer, okay? So this is going to substitute out to be tangent. Okay? All right, now, what do I do in this situation? I have this, back in our tip sheet, we talked about you can split these fractions. So secant squared over tan squared plus 1 over tan squared. Okay? All right. Now, what does that mean? This is secant squared divided by tangent squared plus 1 divided by tangent squared. Okay, so that's 1 over cosine divided by sine squared over cosine squared plus 1 divided by sine over cosine. Okay, I want to flip the second fraction. Okay, so what happens here? This goes away, so I'm left with 1 over sine squared. Okay, this would also be basically cosine squared over sine squared. Now, 2 ways you could have done this answer. Okay, all right, 2 ways you could do this answer. You could say flat out that is cosecant squared theta, because that's what that would be, plus cotangent squared theta, and multiply it by -1, which would give me negative cosecant squared minus cotangent squared. Okay? All right. If you wanted to combine like terms, that would be 1 plus cosine squared over sine squared theta. All right? And I would multiply that by -1. Either answer would be acceptable. Okay? So, go ahead and you want to try this one on your own. Cotangent squared theta minus cosecant squared theta all over 1 minus sine squared. And then I also want you to try cotangent squared theta minus 1 over 1 minus sine squared theta. Okay, you go ahead and try those two on your own. Okay, the answer, you can find those in the Canvas module. Okay. All right, another one I'd like you to go over, we're going to start to talk about verify. All right, which is cosecant squared theta minus 1 over cosecant squared theta equals cosine squared theta. Okay, now, here's the idea with verify. The idea of verify is it's very similar to simplify, except they're telling you where to go. So the bottom line is, what this means is you're trying to show both sides equal to each other. Okay? Now, if you ever get in the situation where you've done your work and it doesn't quite match up, see if you can change that one. Okay, we'll do an example of that in a little bit. Most of the time, though, if you don't match up, you did something wrong along the way. Okay? Now, this right here is an identity. This identity is cotangent squared. Okay? Well, what does that mean? Cotangent squared divided by cosecant squared. Okay, so that's cosine squared over sine squared divided by sine squared. Okay, so, I'm sorry, divided by 1 over, that's not right, hold on 1 second. Divided by 1 over sine squared. Sorry. So the division tells me to flip this. So now it's sine squared over 1. With multiplication, I now cross this off. So what does this equal? Cosine squared equals, and that's what I was trying to get to. Cosine squared. So what you have to show is you have to show that both sides are equal to each other. I'll follow your math. Okay? All right? Let's do another one. Secant squared, cotangent squared minus 1 equals cotangent squared. So I want to work with the more complicated one. This is a square here. Okay, so that's 1 over cosine squared. This is times cosine squared over sine squared minus 1. Okay, now what's convenient here is this crosses off. I got 1 over sine squared theta minus 1 equals. Okay, now I got addition of fractions. Okay, so this would be times sine squared times sine squared. So I got 1 minus sine squared over sine squared. Now, this is an identity. That identity would be cosine squared. So when I say identity, go back to that chart of all those identities. Okay, so that's going to be sine squared over cosine squared over sine squared, which is cotangent squared. And that's what I was looking for. Okay. All right. So the one I would like you to try is secant of theta, cosecant of theta times tangent of theta minus 1 equals tangent squared. Okay, you can try that and then check that in Canvas. Okay. All right. Now let's do 2 more together. And then you can do 1 on your own, and that's it for this lesson. So I got 1 over cosecant theta plus cotangent of theta plus 1 over cosecant of theta minus cotangent of theta equals 2 cosecant of theta. Okay, now, what we want to do here, okay, I want to get a common denominator. I want to work this side. Now, the quick way to do that is to multiply this side by what's over here. And I'd also do that on the top and bottom. This one I want to multiply here. Okay, so I distribute that. That's going to be cosecant minus cotangent. 1 times that would be another cosecant. plus another cotangent. Now, the bottom here, this is like what we talked about the other day, where if I have 2x plus 3 times 2x minus 3, the fast way to do this is 2x times 2x is 4x squared. 3 times negative 3 is negative 9. Okay? Because the middles are going to cancel each other out. Same thing here. Cosecant times cosecant, cosecant squared. Negative cotangent times that would be cotangent squared. Okay? Now, if I look at what's going to combine here, these are going to get crossed off. I have 2 cosecants there. Okay? So we're getting to where we need to go. All right? Now this, I want to check that because that's something a little bit more complicated than we normally have down there. Now that is also an identity. That is going to be 1. So this divided by 1 will just be cosecant. Okay? All right? So that's subbed out for an identity. So sometimes you need to check that. Okay? Sometimes you need to check that. All right? Let's do one more. Okay? I got 1 over cosecant theta plus 1 plus 1 over cosecant theta minus 1 equals 2 secant squared theta sine theta. Okay, all right. Now, for this one, it's the same deal. I want to multiply by this, top and bottom. I want to multiply this here. Okay, so I distribute that. That's cosecant theta minus 1. That's cosecant theta plus 1. All right. All over, okay, cosecant times cosecant is cosecant squared. Negative 1 times 1 would be negative 1. Okay? Now, the 1's cancel out here. I got 2 cosecant of theta. Okay? This right here is an identity. This will turn into cotangent squared theta. Okay? All right? Now, what does this mean? This is 2 cosecant theta divided by cotangent squared. Okay? And I would want to rewrite that as 2, all right, over sine theta, because that's what sine would be, divided by cosine squared over sine squared. Okay? Division of fractions means that I flip that. Okay? I can cross off one of the signs. So what am I left with? 2 sine with cosine squared in the bottom. Now, if you don't know that this turns into this, here's something else that I can accept. This I could convert to 2 sine of theta, and then secant squared is just cosine squared theta underneath. And as you can see, they match up. All right? So sometimes you're allowed to convert them both sides, as long as you can show both sides are equal. You could have also just converted this to that. Okay? All right? And then the one I would like you to try, okay, is cosine theta over 1 plus sine theta plus cosine theta over 1 minus sine theta, showing that equal to 2 secant theta. What I like to do is go back and give you some of the answers to the other problems, okay, just in case they're not in Go Formative, okay? All right, so the verifies, you should be good, all right? All right, for the tries, okay, let me just tell you that this one here, actually I think I do have this in Canvas. Yeah, I will have that in Canvas. It's going to show how to do both those problems. I think the only one I do have to show you is, well, I'll just give it to you anyway, while we're talking about it. Okay, this one right here, this answer would be negative secant squared. Okay, this answer here, I would take cosecant squared theta minus secant squared theta, or if you did cosine squared theta minus sine squared theta, all over cosine squared sine squared. That's okay as well. Okay, and then get back up to the other questions. It's the try. I think that might be it. Yeah, so we did that. All right, you tried those, you got that one. And then it's the verify. Yeah, the verify, you should get that. All right, so you just got to practice this stuff. The big thing is to go through the practice, go through your formative. You should be fine.